Hi everybody, welcome to MexElects, our weekly segment of news and reviews. And there's one story that we're going to lead with today that just isn't going away and probably won't for the duration of the campaign, and that's the controversy, the scandal really, over the entry of Jaime Rodriguez Calderon, aka El Bronco, into the presidential race as a result of the decision taken by the National Electoral Tribunal overruling the previous decision of the National Electoral Institute, who are the ones who actually count the number of signatures needed, about 1 million or so, to become a candidate in the presidential race. So this has turned into a kind of battle royale, openly criticizing these two institutions, criticizing each other. The Electoral Tribunal say that the Electoral Institute's methodology was wrong. If they had kept on counting, one could infer that El Bronco would have had enough signatures. The INE responding that, hey, you guys don't have a clue about how a counting and recounting 1 million signatures actually takes place and how they're validated, and all of these other issues, because as we said in a previous video, there were tens of thousands of signatures which were ruled invalid that were based on photocopied credentials and identification and so forth. This has been well documented in the media. So really kind of things have descended from tragedy to farce to some other level that at MexElects we're trying to figure out what that
what comes after farce.
What comes after farce.
If any of you are watching has any ideas what's the next stage after farce, please write in.
Yeah. So, this is very much in the news, but stepping back from it a little bit, what it really shows us is how completely fractured and fragmented the state is becoming. The old hegemony of the and then the pre-An, as some people call it, the pre-Pan agreement to trade power back and forth, is really fracturing and seriously undermining the hegemony of that old coalition. So there are some really big questions about that. Is this going to actually work in favor of the PRI? Because one of the big parts of this scandal is that the National Tribunal, Electoral Tribunal, is populated by PRI and PAN appointees. And, there's a very good chance, of course, that this could completely blow up in their face. The number one issue, as we've said time and again, sucking all of the air out of the room, is the question of corruption. And this is just the most bald-faced example of corruption at the very heart of the state that you can imagine. So, that raises some big questions there. And we're going to come back and take any questions that people might have about this. How this going to play? I mean, clearly, what most commentators are saying is this was a move to try and undermine the vote of López Obrador in the north of the country, where his vote has been traditionally weaker. But there are real questions around whether this strategy will work significantly enough to actually affect the campaign of AMLO, because he has been picking up some considerable support, really for the first time in the north. Right. So we're going to be certainly looking at any other issues around this that you want to raise?
Yeah, it's really been an extraordinary week in Mexican politics, in exactly in the sense that you mentioned, that the monolithic facade of state fraud is now cracking. It's cracking before our eyes. So as we mentioned in our last live stream, and as Colin mentioned here, the Electoral Tribunal overruled the INE in a split 4-3 decision. What's interesting, as Colin pointed out, is that the magistrates of the tribunal, 3 were appointed by the PRI, 3 by the PAN, and I think 1 by the PRD. So the deck was stacked. Lopez Obrador said 2 years ago in a tweet that he recently retweeted, he said, "Why are you surprised? Why are you surprised? You know the deck was stacked, and now even the parties in the PAN are rending their garments, when they knew what the play was." What's interesting is that the magistrates were given different term lengths in order to have like a staggered length of terms.
Right.
There'd be kind of a staggered replacing of these magistrates. Recently, several of those magistrates had their terms extended.
Yes.
And those, not surprising, are the people, the judges who supported this farcical decision to allow Rodriguez Calderon to be on the ballot. As Colin pointed out, he didn't get the number of signatures. He didn't even get the number of signatures. I mean, you can argue, all right, if he had gotten the number of signatures, maybe you can dispute, he didn't get there. Yeah. They inferred, the Electoral Tribunal inferred that if the INE counting process or revision process had been allowed, or if he'd been allowed to continue revising his ballots, he would have gotten there. I think this is probably a first in the history of world jurisprudence that something that might have happened now becomes a causal, a causal definition for allowing somebody.
It's subjunctive is a big part of Spanish, so
yeah, that's right. This is a subjunctive ruling completely.
Yeah.
But this isn't all. The next day, the INE comes out and says, well, we are going to report Rodriguez Calderon's El Bronco. We're going to report El Calderon's violations to the FEPADE. The FEPADE is the Attorney General's office specializing in electoral crimes. Basically, it's fairly toothless. They can, apply sanctions or punish electoral crimes, but they cannot get involved in electoral affairs. They can't touch the election itself, and usually their rulings come out years after the election.
Long afterward.
So the INE basically, as an expression of how upset they were, said, well, okay, if the Trife thinks Rodriguez Calderon is fine, we're going to show that he did commit infractions along the way, crimes, and we're going to send those to FEPADE, which is about all they can do at this point. Okay. The Trife then came out, 4 of the judges, the 4 judges who voted in the majority, came out and held a bizarre press conference saying, we are not political actors. It's like, well, nobody asked you. It's like, what kind of confession do you feel the need to come out with to hold this bizarre press conference to say, oh, we're not involved in politics here, while the other 3 magistrates, including the head of the Electoral Tribunal, kind of looked on silently, kind of shaking their heads, kind of like, what the fuck? And then to cap off the whole thing, which is exactly why we're asking you, what's the stage after farce? El Bronco said, I'm going to sue the INE, I'm going to sue the Electoral Tribunal for defamation. Yeah. So this is the last step in all of what's happened this week. So anyway, all of that, as it happened, I think the interesting question from an analysis point of view is, in previous elections, those of us who sat through these, there's been kind of this unified front. Yeah. There's certainly always been disputes amongst the elites behind closed doors and power and turf wars and all that, but it has never spilled over into the public in the way that it did this week between the Electoral Institute and the Electoral Tribunal. This is certainly unprecedented, and it certainly indicates a fracturing of the elite system. Yeah. This elite pre-PAN system, trade the ball back and forth, trade the presidency back and forth. And that's really now spilling out into the public sphere, which I think is very positive in one sense, that this kind of old elite consensus that we're going to come together and do whatever it takes to hold power is fracturing. I think it's also dangerous in the sense of whenever you have an elite-controlled system that begins to fracture, the system is inherently more unstable, and that could lead to, we don't know. Yeah. Would that lead to the PRI becoming even more desperate to hold on to power? right? The PRI hasn't had to resort to, sending out the tanks because they've always had the simulation system in place.
Yeah.
The simulated electoral system has always worked.
Yeah.
The simulated democracy has always worked. If that breaks down, what will they resort to?
Yeah.
Certainly the decision to put El Bronco on the ballot this week reeks of desperation.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't reek of an electoral system that is, an elite system that's self-confident.
Completely in
Right.
control of itself. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really, in many ways, going to kind of break open
Yeah.
the electoral campaign in a way that we haven't seen so far. It's been very kind of methodical,
Yeah.
controlled. Getting the horses ready, walking them through their paces.
Right.
However poorly, some of them have been going through their paces. So the other big story
Yeah.
that we need to talk about is one that just broke yesterday, and that's around the case of the 43 missing students at Ayotzinapa. You want to talk about that, Kurt?
Yeah, so as many of you probably know, was it 3 years ago now? 43 students were disappeared from the rural teaching college in Ayotzinapa. They were going to be taking over some buses to be heading to a commemoration of the 1968 October 2nd massacre. Sorry, yeah, in 1968. They were disappeared. To this day, it's not clear what happened to them. The government at the time, the federal government, using forced confessions, using torture, as we talked about in other videos, came up with what the then Attorney General Murillo Karam called the historical truth.
Yeah.
This is the historical truth that is not to be questioned in any way. And the historical truth was that the students were apprehended by the local police in Iguala, in the town of Iguala, and handed over to a supposedly local gang called the Guerreros Unidos, who then kind of were outsourced to kill them, and they were supposedly incinerated in a riverbed in the town of Copula.
Yeah.
Now this was immediately, even back then, discredited. The amount of fuel that would have been required to burn 43 bodies. It would have created a pyre that would have been seen for miles around. The fact that there was some rain that night. The fact that the remains of 43 bodies were never found there. The fact of the torture, the forced confessions. The historical truth was discredited almost from the beginning. But the federal government has shown an incredible hermeticism with regards to national and international organizations, forensic organizations, trying to get in and find out what really happened. And this has been going on for years since. What came out yesterday in the Reforma newspaper is there's a trial going on in Illinois, in the state of Illinois in the United States, against certain members of the Guerreros Unidos gang. They're kind of investigating the international connections of drug trafficking that make it up to the states. And the judge had ordered a couple of years ago that some of the phones had been tapped and those conversations were recorded. Reforma got a hold of those transcripts, which are in the power of the Attorney General's office here in Mexico. And from what transpires in those transcripts, it would appear, nothing is ever certain about this case, it would appear that the order to disappear those students came from the United States, not the American government. It came from the Guerreros Unidos drug gang members, kingpins, living in the States. Right. There was this exchange of phone calls going back that night. Apparently there was a turf war going on between the Guerreros Unidos and another local gang called Los Rojos. The students, under this hypothesis, would have been mistaken to have been members of Los Rojos and killed incidentally, we can say, as a part of this. The conversations also seem to show that there were more people killed that night than 43.
They mentioned 60.
Up to 60 packets.
Yeah.
That was kind of the code word they used for the killing of people. This kind of sheds an international angle on the case that's really, it's chilling in the sense, this idea that we were sold that the Guerreros Unidos was simply a local gang.
Yeah.
Simply a local gang of
Yeah.
drug ruffians.
Bunch of toughs.
Bunch of
hanging
local
out
young
on the
toughs.
corner.
Yeah. Has been totally disproven, totally discredited. This is a gang with international connections, an international supply line, and an international organizational structure where certain kingpins in the United States call the shots.
Yeah.
You know, so this idea that there are just a couple of big name gangs that we all know about, the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas cartel and all that. No, it's much more complicated than that. It's much more international than that. Even what's the supposedly smaller regional gangs are cut up in this international network of drug trafficking, and the collusion with local and state governments goes even farther than we thought.
Yeah, right.
Because from what seems to have transpired, the local police were in total collusion.
Yeah.
In other words, it wasn't the local police calling the shots at all and handing them over to Guerreros Unidos. It was the other way around.
Taking the orders from.
It was taking the orders from Guerreros Unidos,
Right.
arresting them, and then the Guerreros Unidos would have taken on the task of disappearing the students and the other members of Los Rojos. Very, very troubling, and it certainly makes one understand even more why the Peña Nieto government has been so resistant, so desiring to bury this story, to make sure this story doesn't come back. Will it come back now, you know, with this, with the
As a big
campaign?
player in the election.
Right. The level of collusion is simply, you know, the narco-state collusion is simply extraordinary.
Yeah, okay. So, we're live. Some of you may have some questions, some general questions coming out of this because we've been sort of trolling through the detail of the big stories this week. But they do raise some pretty big, larger, slightly more abstract questions about not just the electoral campaign, but the viability of the Mexican state,
Right.
going forward.
Before we hit, because we have a couple of questions coming in, I just want to do a quick summary in Spanish. Vamos a hacer un breve resumen en español de las dos noticias grandes que hemos mencionado hasta ahora, hoy en el programa. Primero es esta farsa que se está desenvolviendo entre el Instituto Nacional Electoral y el Tribunal Electoral. El Tribunal Electoral decidió que Jaime Rodríguez Calderón, el Bronco, ya va a aparecer en la boleta electoral a pesar de todas las irregularidades, las falsificaciones de firmas, las fotocopias, todo lo que mencionamos en la última transmisión en vivo. Ni siquiera llegó al umbral de firmas. El tribunal en su fallo dijo que bueno, si la revisión se hubiera continuado, si el Bronco hubiera podido revisar más firmas, si el proceso hubiera llegado a su límite, pues tal vez, quizá, ojalá, a lo mejor, habría llegado al umbral de firmas. Entonces, como la primera vez tal vez en la historia de la jurisprudencia, que una inferencia acerca de algo que podría haber pasado,
Sí.
vuelve un causal legal en un caso como este. Eso desencadenó básicamente una guerra internecina entre el INE, que dice, bueno, nosotros vamos a mandar las pruebas que nosotros tenemos acerca de las irregularidades cometidas por el Bronco al FEPADE, la Fiscalía Especializada en Delitos Electorales. Esto obviamente pertenece al Ejecutivo, entonces obviamente el Ejecutivo no va a hacer gran cosa en este caso, o años después. Y los 4 jueces del TRIFE que votaron a favor del Bronco salieron en una bizarra, una ridícula conferencia de prensa, dicen, bueno, nosotros no nos metemos en asuntos electorales. Bueno, ok. Y luego el Bronco decide que va a demandar al INE por defamación. Todo eso en el transcurso de algunos días. Y lo que esto muestra es pues esta fachada monolítica del Estado, de la simulación, ¿no? Ya se está desmoronando, ya, bueno, vamos a ver que si hay un desmoronamiento, pero por lo menos hay una fisura bastante grande en esta fachada monolítica. Jamás hemos visto, y seguramente los élites siempre se pelean atrás de puertas cerradas, pero jamás hemos visto que una de esas peleas
Sí.
se convierte en un asunto tan público
Sí.
a 2 meses y medio de las elecciones. Yo creo que por un lado es algo muy positivo, que el estado de la simulación ya no funciona como antes, ya no hay un consenso unánime de las élites, que vamos a mantener apariencias y haya sido lo que haya sido, vamos a hacer lo necesario para conservar el poder. Pero por otro lado es algo peligroso porque el estado de la simulación mantenía pues un sistema obviamente opresivo y injusto tal como está. Ahora que el PRI se siente arrinconado, ahora que la simulación ya no funciona como antes, ahora que hay peleas ahí, ¿qué va a hacer un PRI acorralado? Sí. ¿Qué va a hacer un grupo de élites que quieren conservar el poder a como de lugar sin esta fachada monolítica? Violencia, desesperación, no sabemos, medidas más fuertes, obviamente la decisión de poner a Rodríguez Calderón en la boleta huele a desesperación, no es la decisión de un grupo de élites que con la seguridad y la confianza que todo marche en un buen sentido. Esa fue la primera noticia que cubrimos. La segunda noticia es la revelación del periódico Reforma de que en la noche de Iguala, Ayotzinapa, los 43 desaparecidos del normal rural, esta noche parece que, según esas transcripciones de las conversaciones de llamadas intervenidas desde Illinois en Estados Unidos, que el orden de matar o desaparecer a los 43 provino de los jefes, los capos de Guerreros Unidos en Estados Unidos, no de manera local, a manera de un tipo de guerra de terreno entre Guerreros Unidos y otra banda delictiva que se llama Los Rojos. Según esta hipótesis, los estudiantes pues habrían sido vistos como miembros de Los Rojos, un error, algo ahí, y fueron desaparecidos en medio de este terreno de nadie, ¿no? Y según lo que salió ahí, había más matanzas esta noche, 50 hasta 60 paquetes, según el código que usaba, más matanzas ahí. Esto es algo realmente escalofriante porque la verdad histórica que nos intentó vender el entonces Procurador General Murillo Caram era que la Policía Municipal había agarrado a los estudiantes, los había entregado a Guerreros Unidos para matarlos o desaparecerlos, tipo outsourcing, muy macabro. Y ahora resulta, si esto es cierto, que es todo lo contrario, ¿no? Que el orden provino de Estados Unidos, el orden vino de Guerreros Unidos para desaparecer a los estudiantes y miembros de los Rojos, y que la policía local acató órdenes del crimen organizado. Sí. Entonces, una muestra más de la colusión entre policía, gobierno y narco, y se muestra mucho más extendido lo que se pensaba antes. No solamente son unos cuantos grupos grandes como las Zetas de la banda de Sinaloa, sino también lo que antes se consideraba como grupos regionales, locales, como Guerreros Unidos, también tiene su estructura jerarcal y sus nexos con Estados Unidos y dan órdenes a la policía local, ¿no? Entonces, bastante escalofriante si esta noticia es cierta. Okay, so that's the update in English and Spanish. Now we're going to go to some of your questions and do some comments. Yeah. One question we have here is, will the Bronco being on the ballot hurt AMLO? This is this is from Richard. Didn't put his last name. Hi, Richard. This is will the Bronco thing, will the Bronco being on the ballot hurt AMLO? What do you think, Colin? Well, it appears to be designed to hurt AMLO. Yeah. Will it actually do so?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, clearly, if there was a strategy, it was to try and drain away votes in the north from AMLO in the person of El Bronco.
Right.
Part of the problem here, or we can anticipate some of these questions arising, is El Bronco presents himself and is presented as the Trump populist riding in on horseback, who's going to serve the people, and so forth in the sort of Trumpian mold. The difference is that he is currently holding office. I mean, one of Trump's big advantages was that he had never held office, so he just kind of swanned in and said, I'm a successful billionaire, I'm going to run the country like I run my companies, and all will be right in the universe. El Bronco is holding power, and from what I gather, despite his self-promotion, he's not all that popular, even in his home state. He has a track record. And the danger is, and it's always a danger for someone like this when they're seeking power but don't yet hold it. He could come off simply as a buffoon, as a kind of desperate play by the PRI, because from what I've read, El Bronco's backers are Salinas Gortari, another PRI former president, who basically handed him the governorship in
just as a parenthetical there,
Nuevo León.
This former president and kind of power broker behind the throne, Salinas Gortari, recently just celebrated his 70th birthday party. All the elites were there, from Peña Nieto to the PRI cronies, which were to be expected, but also PAN bigwigs like Diego Fernández de Ceballos, kind of a cross-party fiesta of elites. And just days after the whole thing with El Bronco came out, right?
It's kind of like the celebration of The Godfather. Like we're
exactly.
We're all going to gather around, and then a few days later, El Bronco appears on the horizon.
I'm going to save you all the mafia voice today. I've done that too much.
So, it's too early to tell, but this could play very badly for El Bronco as an individual, but for the larger plan to try and disrupt the vote for López Obrador in the north, simply because the guy lacks any credibility on the national stage, and appears to have no real credibility in his home state where he's governor. So. And it plays into, of course, the as I said earlier, the kind of overarching narrative of this whole campaign, which is the strong suit of AMLO, which is the entire system is utterly corrupt, and this is just one more example of massive collusion and corruption at the level of the state and electoral authorities, and plays into the scenario that a fraud is underway. So many people may just be even more convinced that they have to get rid of this whole corrupt system, and by electing AMLO, and it may rebound to his benefit.
Yeah, this might be a case of a desperate system shooting itself in the foot. Certainly the condemnation about the Tree-Phase decision has been practically unanimous across the political spectrum. The only party that's been, hey, this is great, is the PRI.
Right, with Mayade saying, bienvenidos, we welcome all, shamelessly, but very, very quickly, rather than saying, tellingly. Maybe we should wait and see what the authorities, what sort of shakes out of this. No, welcome, become part of the campaign.
But besides the PRI's own shamelessness, the condemnation has been across the board. I mean, even the masters of opinion, Denise Dresser has come out against it. Even the conservatives like Enrique Krause. The establishment's House historian have come out against this. I mean, the condemnation has been across the board and practically unanimous. So that's one indication that the game might not have gone as the PRI would have wanted. What the PRI wants, it seems to me, even if the Bronco, doesn't get very far in his campaign. It's more public financing because the independent candidates, unlike the U.S., get public financing in Mexico if they qualify to be on the ballot. It's more ads against AMLO. It's more spots. It's another voice in the debates against him. It's just basically more public money to be used against AMLO in the campaign of desgaste, the campaign of wearing him down by having to fend off attacks from several fronts. And it's not surprising that, you know, the Bronco came out guns a-blazing against AMLO in his first comments, and there's actually an interesting video of him calling the president, or you know, getting a call from the president congratulating him, you know, for being on the ballot and kind of saying, "Well, I owe it all to you," you know, in so many words.
And that's true. I think that you know, he's a self-styled Bronco. So he doesn't really have to abide by, if his mission is to simply discredit and go after AMLO, he can do it in a style, in a manner which, you know, puts all sort of the niceties of you know, a civil political campaign completely to the side and just go like an attack dog, and that will be his role, and simply to play the attack dog, time and time again to try and wear down AMLO, as you say. So I think there's something certainly to that.
And then kind of one more point on this, and we've got another question that's coming in about the Electoral Tribunal, an interesting question. Back in 2006. Back when the facade of electoral simulation was still, you know, in place, the night of the election, and then subsequently, of course, with all the fraud, AMLO, you know, brought suit to the Electoral Tribunal, and the Electoral Tribunal said, well, you know, it's true. Basically, what you said is true, but we're not changing the election. You know, Vicente Fox did get involved in the election in a legal way. The CCE, the Business Council, put out spots in an illegal way. All kinds of irregularities, the packages, the electoral packets. But we're not going to change the election. So AMLO made that famous statement, which he was pilloried for years afterwards. Al diablo con sus instituciones. You know, to hell with their institutions. You know, then people twisted it afterwards, and he said, no, he said to hell with all the institutions. No, what he said is to hell with their institutions, and he was portrayed as, you know, rebel, firebrand, anarchist, bomb thrower, sore loser, whatever you want. Now, basically, you know, Joe Average on the street can say, AMLO was right. Let me look at this. This is ridiculous. You know, al diablo con sus instituciones, and that actually kind of plays into another question that's here from Silvia Valverde. Hi, Silvia. Is there any certainty of a genuine result coming out on election night? ¿Hay alguna certidumbre de que va a haber algún resultado genuino a la noche de la elección? Well, again, you know, I remember 2006. There was supposed to be some kind of announcement at 8 o'clock. The polls close at 6 in Mexico. It's 8 in the morning to 6 at night. There was supposed to be some announcement at 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, they said, we don't know. Wait till 11. Yeah, news at 11. So, okay, we're like, oh, this doesn't sit right. So we're all sitting there like, in 2006. 11 o'clock comes, and the drip head of then the Federal Electoral Institute, Luis Carlos Ugalde, subsequently baptized as Luis Carlos Fraude, came out and said, we don't have enough, it's too close to call at 11 o'clock. And we're like, oh, God damn it. It's too close to call, even though the final polls had AMLO up by several points. And so we're just watching and watching and watching. About 3 o'clock in the morning, there's kind of a pause in the updating in the system, and the system comes back online. Then kind of the line between Calderon and AMLO kind of crosses. It was about 3:30 in the morning. We're staying up all night, and you know, eventually Calderon supposedly won with a 0.56% difference, right? But the whole thing was discredited. And so
on the basis that you simply couldn't have, statistically speaking, that kind of a swing, in the vote, that it simply would be impossible, for that to happen.
Well, the AMLO came out with a study. I think his name was Luis Mochan, if I remember correctly. And he ran the numbers and said, kind of mathematically, kind of a 1-to-1 correspondence between AMLO losing votes and Calderon gaining votes is statistically impossible.
Yeah.
There would have to be kind of more of a random movement in the numbers, but not a 1-to-1 correspondence.
Yeah.
And there was the case that also happened in 2012 of, precincts with 80-90% in favor of a candidate. A bunch of precincts that were double, triple, quadruple, quintuple counted in the count.
Yeah.
Part of this was the problem that, Lopez Obrador's movement did not get enough people to cover the precincts.
Right. Yes.
Poll watchers at that point. But, it's not the candidate's fault if the system commits fraud.
Yeah.
So going back to the question here, then, kind of the great Mexican thing is when an institution loses its prestige, you change the name and you change the head. So after 2006, Ugalde was fired, they put in another head. Then after the 2012 election, which is a whole other story, they changed the name of the institute from the Federal Electoral Institute to the National Electoral Institute. So now it's different. Borrón y cuenta nueva, right?
Yeah.
Now it's not Cheerios, it's Rice Krispies.
Yeah.
So this is supposed to make it a different thing. The twist this year is, as we mentioned, I think in the live stream last week, this is going to be the biggest election in the history of Mexico. There's going to be the president, the entire Congress, and 30 of 32 states are holding elections at the same time, plus the mayor of Mexico City. So when you go, there's going to be a bunch of different boxes.
Right.
It's not like, a computer screen, or it's not like a machine like this, or something like everybody's on the same ballot. It's not. You get a separate federal ballot, which goes in the federal box. Well, you get the president's ballot, which goes in the president's box. Then you get your senator ballot, which goes in the senator's box, etc. Then you have your state elections. So if you're electing state officials at the same time, it's, then you vote for your governor here, and, and there's a whole lineup of boxes.
Right. Yeah.
This is the way it works. And you get a series of different ballots, So what the INE said this year is we want to provide certainty in the elections, which is why they have these agreements now with Facebook. Look, in the light of Zuckerberg in Congress this week, how ridiculous that seems. And Twitter and Google, and we're going to get those results out as soon as possible. And at 11 o'clock, we want to have some kind of results to give you. So what the INE said was, well, in the key precincts, kind of the indicative precincts, we're going to open up the packets, because all the ballots are put into electoral packets that are then sealed, together with the sheet count, the count sheet, and then they're sent off to the Institute. They said, in the key precincts, we're going to open those packets to make sure that people don't accidentally put presidential votes in a governor's packet or box, or the governor's vote in the president's box, and this way we'll be able to have more certainty about the election. The Trife then, a bunch of parties, including Morena, disputed that and said, we don't want the INE opening packages on election night, because what they could stuff ballots in there. We don't want the packages being opened, so we want those seals to be in place. And the Trife said, yes, you can't open the packages. And so the INE got into a huff. This was actually in February. So this was kind of the fight before the most recent fight between the Electoral Institute and the Tribunal. And the INE said, well, fine, then we won't open the packets, and we'll just go off the count sheets, which go outside. But then we might not have a result at 11 o'clock, or it might not be that sure. And boy, if they don't have some kind of result to give at 11 o'clock at night, every single candidate is going to pronounce themselves to be a winner, and it's going to be a chaos. It's going to be a chaos. So kind of the fraudulent history of the system means they've been backed into a corner because nobody trusts them. So they have to take these extreme measures to try to gain trust, which kind of holds up the count, and there's not a count, and there's not a result, and then it even throws more doubt into the whole thing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a lot to chew on, as they say. So thank you very much. It's great that people tune in and actually send us questions that we can address. So thank you very much. On behalf of MexElects, we will see you again live from Oaxaca in a week's time.